Hello, Packers fans. Welcome to the Green 19 podcast. I am most certainly not your usual host, Cassidy Hill. She has left us for the Carolina Panthers, which just so happens to be the next opponent on the docket here for the Green Bay Packers. My name is JR Radcliffe. You may or may not recognize my voice from a couple other podcasts we put together here at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, such as Microbrew, which is our Brewers podcast with Kurt Hogan, Todd Rosiak, the Point Forward podcast with Jim Ozarski covering the Milwaukee Bucks. So maybe I'm not a completely unfamiliar voice. Fortunately, if I am, you do recognize the two gentlemen who are joining me on this episode. PackersNews.com reporters Tom Silverstein and Ryan Wood. They are at Lambeau Field in Green Bay. We've got this Panthers game coming up. Joe Barry is still top of mind. Are you guys able to still work? You know, I think you kind of have to create your own energy when someone like Cassidy subtracts from the equation. It's kind of like playing in front of an empty stadium in Carolina, right? You guys have to kind of, I don't know what you do. I don't know how you overcome something like this.
Yeah, Hurricane Cassidy has passed through, and so now we're in the recovery stage. But we're happy to have you, JR. We won't compare you or hold you up to your accent as we would Cassidy or your
Taylor Swift knowledge,
Swift references. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're happy to be with you.
Yeah, it is fun. I am excited to be here. This is going to be a good time. I do not have a good Southern accent, but even Cassidy's gone. Joe Barry's still here. We're going to talk about that a little bit. I mean, since we last had a Green 19 podcast, Matt LeFleur has spoken, gave his weekly press conference Monday, indicating there would be no imminent change in the defensive coordinator, despite kind of the struggles that Joe Barry's defense has had, especially lately. He talked about a lack of communication being the biggest culprit. Now, both of you guys have spoken to players since then and kind of gotten a sense of how they feel about it. I think, Tom, you had written that they kind of dodged questions about, whether or not the coaches were putting them in the best position to succeed. There's a lot of diplomacy going around there. And Ryan, I kind of want to start with you because you wrote this stories on PackersNews.com. You spoke to Keyshawn Nixon and others about the communication breakdowns and kind of how things have snowballed a little bit in these last two games. I guess I'm curious how your opinion or your sort of impression of the whole situation with Joe Barry or the defense in general has changed, if at all, over the past couple days, hearing from the players' perspective and what they think about it. I mean, are we oversimplifying it by saying it is a defensive coordinator issue when it might actually be a much broader, much more complicated issue?
Well, this can be a yes-and situation, right? Yes, there's a defensive coordinator issue. It's not all Joe Barry's fault. It's not like every single thing that's wrong with this Packers defense falls on the lap of Joe Barry. It's, they haven't had Jair Alexander in for 6 games. They traded away Rasul Douglas. Those are 2 veteran corners that might help with communication. But it's been enough time now since they traded Rasul Douglas and they haven't had Jair Alexander for a month and a half that they haven't had this issue. And I thought it was very interesting when I was talking with Quay Walker, a linebacker, and linebackers on the field are your quarterback for defense, right? They are responsible for the pre-snap communication. I thought it was very interesting. He said, it started with CV, Carrington Valentine, not getting the call last week, and it just kind of it just all steamrolled into the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game. At the end of that Giants game, it was only a 9-yard little quick pass from Tommy DeVito to Darius Slayton, but on the final drive of that Giants game, the 2-minute drill, Carrington Valentine didn't get the call. He played 10 yards off coverage in that situation and gave up a free layup to help spark that drive, because he was hedging his bets. Like, I'm not going to give up a deep ball. I don't know what to do here. But when your players don't know what to do, and you saw that for 4 quarters against the Bucs, that's the coach's job. Your coordinator's job is to teach and make sure that the players are all on one page. You can't do your 1/11th, as they like to say, when all 11 don't know what to do. It was very apparent that all 11 did not know what to do. So, yeah, that falls directly at the feet of Joe Barry.
Tom, how about you? How are you feeling about it, having talked to some of the players in the locker room?
Well, I think the sense that I get is that the players want to be put in positions to make plays. And this is my own vision of what I think probably happened. And players were pretty tight-lipped about everything yesterday, other than that, they met with LeFleur, and some of them did, and were kind of open about what was, their thoughts on things. I think they took a lot of blame for what happened. But from my viewpoint, I thought they played a game where they were catching the Buccaneers instead of going after them. Like they were just sitting back and waiting for Tampa Bay to go, to throw the ball at them, and they figure out what to do. And they weren't an attacking defense. And I think at some point, when you see these guys just dropping dimes on you all day long, you have to change up, and you have to put some pressure on the quarterback. And they've been their best when they have put pressure on the quarterback. In the last 2 games, they've sat back in zones and let 2, not prolific quarterbacks, just slice them apart. So I would guess that this week when they come out against Carolina, they come out much more aggressive against Bryce Young and maybe even simplify what they're doing.
Back-to-back NFC Players of the Week, Baker Mayfield and Tommy DeVito. One of the damning details that that Packers fans were pointing to. Bryce Young has not had a great rookie year, number 1 overall pick, and we'll talk a little bit more about him and kind of what Carolina brings to the table.
Well, and watch
Ryan,
what happens this week. I'll bet you Baker Mayfield throws like 4 interceptions.
Right. Well, Tommy DeVito getting sacked 7 times the week after 0 sacks against the Packers.
Exactly.
That's the thing. It's Tommy DeVito and Baker Mayfield. Just listen to those names. This is not Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy. These are not the cream of the crop of NFC quarterbacks. It's Tommy DeVito and Baker Mayfield. That's stunning.
Yeah, I see exactly what Tom sees. A really bad game for Baker Mayfield coming back to earth, and everyone is once again scratching their heads. Ryan, our colleague Pete Doherty has mentioned a couple times about losing a locker room. I mean, this team, the Packers can win these last 3 games. They are winnable games. I know this team hasn't played like a team that can just go out and win football games, every Sunday, but they could easily be in the playoffs. There's still runway for this team to do something kind of unexpected, kind of special, even given the youth that they have on at least one side of the football, really overall in the whole team. And so a change, I guess theoretically, could do something to that locker room. And when you've got a young team, I don't know if that makes it more likely that a change at defensive coordinator could cause more harm than help. Or, I mean, they certainly are hearing the outside buzz, I have to imagine, knowing that Joe Barry has kind of come under this fire a little bit. So what do you think about the message it sends? I feel like that can get a little oversimplified, but can you lose a locker room by making a move or not making a move in this situation?
I'm not in the meetings. I am in the locker room, and it was interesting to me after I spoke with Quay Walker yesterday. Matt LeFleur just ambles into the locker room, and he's walking by Quay Walker, and Quay Walker's face lights up when he passes by his locker, stops. His face lit up when he sees Coach, right? And they had a good conversation. That, whatever impression that is, it didn't give me the impression of this is a group of players. Quay Walker's a pretty important one to have on your side if you're coach. A group of players that are turning on the head coach, right? You can read a lot by facial expressions sometimes. But at some level, there does have to be accountability. If you're not doing your job in this locker room, you get cut. That's the business of the NFL. It's the way this league works. If you're not doing your job as a coach and when your players don't know what to do, and Tom spoke of not having an attacking defense, it's absolutely right. But you can't attack on defense when you don't know how to attack. You have to know how to attack before you can actually go out there and do it. And when that's not getting relayed to the players, when you have a coach that's not doing his job effectively and there's no accountability there, that is a problem, because players know if I don't do my job, I get cut. I'm out of the league. I got to perform every week to get my paycheck. So where's the accountability on the coaching staff?
There's also the aspect, Tom, that it's hard to imagine with 3 games to go even that a change would actually make a tangible difference. It's hard to come in or presumably have somebody already on staff suddenly be handed over the reins. Certainly 10 times harder for somebody outside, which I don't even think is really on the table. Do you think a change with 3 games left could have made a difference, would make a difference, or is that just hope that type of thing could have a tangible impact?
I think it could have if you would have had a guy like Jerry Gray still on the staff,
sure,
who had been a defensive coordinator, who, if you remember, when Barry had COVID in, I think it was 2020 maybe, or 2021, he was the coordinator in the Arizona game when Rasul Douglas picked off Kyler Murray. So I think I just don't know if you have the guys. I think play calling is really an art form, and if you got nobody who's done it before, it's a little dicey, and you still think you can make the playoffs. It's a tough call. It's a really tough call. What do Joe Barry's going to be Joe Barry. You can tell him, okay, you're going to blitz every single time. And in the clutch, he's going to call what he's used to calling. So I think Matt LeFleur's in a little bit of a pickle. They're going to have to really decide, and really lay out what they want to do in this game before they do it. And if there's adjustments, LeFleur is maybe going to have to spend a little more time listening to what's going on defense. And I don't know if he can, turn over some duties over the, headsets to Adam Stenavich or something, some planning aspect during the game. But I think he's got to pay some attention to the defense during games.
What's so wild about this is if let's say they had fired him. A lot of the guys who are available, presumably outside, are some of the same names that were available the first time around. Jim Leonard among them. Brandon Staley, who is the guy that worked with Joe Barry at the Rams when he was brought in. Brandon Staley is now fired and available, and probably going to be a hot defensive coordinator candidate in the offseason. Runs, of course, this exact same scheme. And I don't know, maybe he's tarnished at this point.
Yeah.
The guy who they'll be facing against Carolina is Ejiro Evero, who's their defense isn't terrible. It's definitely not great, but it's interesting to see his trajectory because Carolina, of course, fired their coach Frank Reich halfway through the season. So will he be available this offseason? I don't know. There's some really interesting names that we've kind of all heard before. And
there's a plethora of guys who will become available because there's still probably about 3 or 4 firings that are going to happen
for sure
in the NFL.
Robert
and
Saleh.
when that happens, oftentimes guys are scrambling to get jobs. And there's still some pretty quality assistant coaches who got interviews last year for defensive coordinator positions. Guy from Tennessee that LeFleur actually interviewed, Chris Harris, defensive backs coach, is a guy. There's some Chris Hewitt from the Baltimore Ravens is another guy. You try to take someone from a program, or a team that has a defensive reputation. And so I think it would be a mistake to do anything too early. You want to see what the full, full spectrum of candidates is going to be.
JR, the name that you said, Robert Saleh, if the Jets happen to fire Robert Saleh, there is no debate. Matt LeFleur hires him in 2 seconds. That's his best friend in life. It's the guy that got him into the league with the Houston Texans back in 2007. I don't see the Jets doing that because I think the Jets would want to, their defense is one of the best in the league. I think the Jets are going to want to run that back get Aaron Rodgers back and have that Jets defense playing the way it is. And obviously Robert Saleh has a lot to do with that. But there's no debate if it's Robert Saleh, if he happens to become available. But, something that's been in my head all week, I've been thinking about this since Tampa Bay. What's that proverbial question with this defense? Is it the players or is it the coaching staff? And this is a defense, as we all know, that is chock full of first-round picks, high-end free agents. That they've really put a lot of assets into forming this defense on paper. So, and they haven't gotten the return that they've wanted. So, is it the players or is it the coaching staff? And if I'm Brian Gutekunst and I'm looking at a defensive coordinator who's your best defensive coach that just made Baker Mayfield look like Tom Brady, it's the first perfect passer rating for an opposing quarterback in Lambeau Field history. But I think even more telling, in 86 career games, that was the first time that Baker Mayfield has had a perfect passer rating in his career. And you allow that to happen, and you can't fire that coach because there's no one on this staff to replace him. That says a lot about this being a coaching issue over not having the right personnel. I'm not saying that they don't have to go out and fill positions in the draft this offseason, but it's an awful indictment when your best defensive coach can't be replaced because there's no one to replace him, even when that's the performance that you get.
Yeah, and I know Tom has spoken on this podcast before about maybe the mistake was not hiring some sort of senior analyst or, consultant, whatever the terminology is, to have somebody who's that extra set of eyes, and then maybe someone who can step in when a situation like this unfolds. Speaking of those guys on that defense, one of them, De'Vondre Campbell, one of the more experienced guys, had quite the tweet a couple days ago or yesterday, I guess, as we're recording this. Very cryptic in my mind, seemed to be in my mind lashing out at the fans who have been critical of him, indicating that he's not going to keep playing through injuries, that he's going to take care of his mental health first. And I wasn't entirely clear if that tied into this conversation about the coaches or if it was strictly about interacting with the fans. He is a player who is online, so that's kind of how I visualized it. He has been given the week off from practice just to kind of heal up. I mean, he isn't actually on the injury report, but just kind of as a veteran break, so to speak, from Matt LeFleur, who seemed to indicate that, well, in his explanation of that tweet was just that it was frustration with the injuries. I think it probably is a little deeper than that. But Tom, what did you make of it? Like, what do we know about that tweet? Is it an indication of some dissatisfaction, or is it purely just like, hey, fans, lay off. We're doing the best we can. We're all a little dinged up, and we're trying, I guess.
I think it was a reaction to social media. I don't think it was a reaction to criticism from his coaches, because, some of the stuff was not his fault. Some of it was, his play hasn't been great. He is on the injury report, by the way, with a
sorry, my mistake.
Yeah. But he has been on, I've seen it. He's been on Twitter before, and he's gotten into it with fans quite a bit. And God, the one thing you need to do as a player is stay off of Twitter. I mean, it's a cesspool for these guys. Don't even engage. Stay off of it. If you don't know what's being said, then all the better. And for some reason, he feels this need to engage and feels like he has to defend his play. And don't do that. If I'm LeFleur, I'm taking his phone away or something, barring his, is there a way he can cancel his IP address or, whatever he's got to do. Stay off the damn internet. And it becomes a thing where I think players now are actually reacting to social media. Okay, I'm hurt. If I play poorly, I'm going to just get slammed by the public. If I'm playing hurt and I'm not playing up to my standard, I'm going to get slammed, and you have to wonder, I think part of that, I don't know if that, I shouldn't speak to it this way, but Jair Alexander's thing, my understanding is he doesn't want to play unless he feels like he can do the things that he normally does.
Sure.
Otherwise, he doesn't think he's an effective player. And there are guys like that, and there's guys with different pain thresholds. But to react to social media is a big, big no-no, and Campbell needs to stop that, and it's probably a good idea to let him heal. They got Isaiah McDuffie. They'll be okay there. But, the lesson there is just stay off it.
I believe when reporters approached him, his words were, "I'm not answering no questions about nothing on the internet," which is a beautiful ethos in life, if it can be adopted. It's what my wife says. Ethos, yes. It's my every time I say, "Hey, I've got this great tweet," that's what my wife says to me. I'm not dealing with anything on no internet. So
it's a beautiful ethos if you didn't just post something on no internet.
Yeah,
right.
If you're not going to answer anything about social media, good for you. If you didn't put that out there on social media, but when you do and you refuse to talk about it, that's not great.
Yeah. Ryan, does it feel like because Jair Alexander and De'Vondre Campbell are presumably two of the leaders on this defense. They're the veterans. They're the guys with all-pro seasons under their belt. And they've both had difficult years for various reasons. Campbell has been hurt and also has struggled. He's obviously not the guy he was in 2021 when he's first team all-pro. Jair Alexander's been out most of the year and is a personality, sometimes mostly for better, I think, but sometimes maybe not. Does this team lack leadership on the defensive side of the ball from the players? Is that part of what this whole calculus with the defensive coordinator, with everything that's gone wrong?
First, a quick note. something else I saw in the locker room yesterday. Jair Alexander walked through, didn't talk, but walked through, and he was wearing a shoulder harness.
Oh,
so
man.
That shoulder's still injured. Like it's and Matt LeFleur was asked this week and said point blank, it was a miscalculation that it's been 6 games now. They didn't put him on injured reserve, which would have, first of all, they didn't really need the roster spot. So it's kind of an overblown conversation. But yeah, they thought he'd be back by now. But the fact that he's not back by now is because of an injury. He's still in a shoulder harness. It's not right yet. So what does that mean for this week when he's been limited? He's been practicing for a month now. We'll see, but he's still in a shoulder harness. He's injured. I do think it's interesting that, and Spoon and I were talking about this yesterday, there's no one in that locker room on the defensive side that's kind of stood up and just said, this is not right. Like, this is what needs to happen. We need to be put in these positions to be able to succeed on the field. Rasul Douglas would have been that guy, but he's in Buffalo now. And Rasul Douglas early in the season, he really took on that leadership role. I haven't seen anyone replace that. So, I'm not in the meetings. I'm not going to say that there's no leaders on defense because without being inside the room, it's hard to tell. But I do think that that's telling.
Yeah, I don't mean to make it sound like there are no leaders on defense. There are. It's just if that's changed. Maybe the Douglas thing is an interesting flashpoint.
I don't know if there are really. I think Preston Smith is a behind-the-scenes kind of guy. I think he does a lot of talking to guys. I think Kenny Clark does, but I think that's more amongst their position groups and not amongst the whole defense. I agree, like Douglas would have been willing to stand up and talk to the entire defense. I think that they do lack that. And, talking to one player, and I won't mention his name, but, he's like, about speaking out, I was asking him about it, and he's like, it's not my place. Like, go talk to one of the guys who's been around here for a while, who's been here for 8 years or is considered, one of the big leaders, because it's not his place he felt it wasn't his place to do that. So, I do think some of those guys need to step forward, but who is it? It should be someone, who has a significant role in the defense. So you would think it would be Quay Walker, but he's a second-year guy.
Sure.
So he's just trying to survive. He's trying to play the game the way he can. I mean, a guy like Darnell Savage should be that guy, but he's hurt all the time. So he's not that guy. I think Jonathan Owens gives him a little bit about that, but he doesn't speak out. He's not a guy who's going to, speak out for the team through the media or anything like that. So I do think they kind of lack that.
Spoon, that's a great point, and I hadn't even thought of that. But if you go down the roster this season, it needs to be a guy who is central to the defense and been around a long time, right? Mm-hmm. Who is that guy? Kenny Clark. You could say Kenny Clark, but Preston Smith's in a rotational role now. Rashawn Gary's the best player in that room. Jair Alexander would be that guy, but he's missed 6 straight games, and he can't lead effectively as possible from the sideline. Darnell Savage is in the same boat. Rasul Douglas was that guy for a reason. He'd been here long enough, and he was a pretty, he was on the field for every snap. He was a starting corner. They don't have a lot of those guys. They're this is a young defense in part. Their central figures haven't been here very long, most of them. And the guys, other than Kenny Clark, the guys that are central figures are either injured and banged up and on the sideline, or not in a primary position on the depth chart.
All right. Well, go ahead.
It's often a safety who is the leader or a middle linebacker, because safeties should be one of your smartest players on the field, and typically they are, and they can get people set up, and they can, express, they see the big picture. A defensive lineman doesn't see the big picture. All he's doing is looking forward, at the offensive line. These other guys, and that was something about Rasul Douglas, is that he was one of the smartest players on the field. So, he could evaluate what was going on and what was wrong. And I don't think they have anyone who can do that or who is doing that, you know?
It goes back to the Rasul Douglas. The decision to trade him came at a time when it seemed like it made all the sense in the world. Trade him because this team is headed toward a high draft pick. And then they won a bunch of games, and now it's like, what if they had him still? Or what if they hadn't cut Adrian Amos, who, granted, obviously is past his prime, probably couldn't play to maintain the roster spot, but maybe he's that safety. I don't know.
Well, who was in Rasul Douglas's spot for that last drive against the Giants? It was Carrington Valentine, the guy that didn't get the call, and a 7th-round rookie. And Joe Barry gave a really good explanation for how it happened. When you're on a running clock, 2-minute situation at the end of the game, it's running clock, things are moving very fast. He's the corner furthest from your own sideline. So he's on an island. Like, there's no help from the sideline. He can't hear your sideline help organize that. Rasul Douglas in that spot, he's a veteran. He's played a ton of football. He gets the call. A 7th-round rookie doesn't, and that's just the way it is. So, yeah, I mean, there's something lost there in terms of organization, not having Rasul Douglas there. You understand why the trade was made, because at the time it looked like they were heading to maybe a top 5 pick and get a 3rd-round pick for a corner that's not going to make the difference in the season. But now they turned things around to a point where Rasul Douglas might have made the difference in the season. They just didn't foresee that.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned injuries a little bit. There was, I guess, some good news on the injury front this week, in that Luke Musgrave has been designated for return off of injured reserve. He, of course, had a lacerated kidney. He has flashed early this season. He looks like he's going to be a really productive player. Tucker Kraft, in Musgrave's absence, has blossomed as well. So I know Packers fans are licking their chops at the possibility of seeing these two guys sharing a field. Both having come into their own as players. Tom, do we think it's one more week for Musgrave, or would they be targeting like the end of the season? Like, what do you sense the timetable is for him?
So what I was told is that, I mean, he's not going to play this week. That's a given. He didn't even really practice today, and he may be listed as did not participate, but was in pads and he's working on the side. They're getting him ready. I think they're getting him ready to practice. So next week, I would expect him to take part in practice, and then they'll evaluate that. I think their hope is that he can play in Minnesota. He's been a fast healer. He's a pretty tough guy. He played through that kidney. I mean, he played a bunch of snaps after lacerating his kidney. And I assume they wouldn't put him on the field if it wasn't completely healed. It's probably a matter of, can he bend? Can he, is he back to his flexibility, his endurance, all that kind of stuff. So we'll see what happens. I think Minnesota would be the earliest, and then they would like to have him at Chicago for sure. But, to sort of illustrate how important he is, like his last, I think it was 3 games maybe, he had like 9 catches for 150 yards and a touchdown. And then he goes out and Kraft comes in and he's got like 13 catches for 170 yards and 2 TDs in 4 games. And so they're thinking, whoa, what if we had both of these guys on the field at the same time now? I mean, I think it was a blessing in disguise for that Musgrave got hurt, because they wouldn't have found out about Kraft.
Yeah.
They were just playing Musgrave all the time. And now they got 2 guys. If they can get them back for Minnesota, that would be huge.
Ryan, I don't think we can expect Christian Watson to be healthy enough. Yeah, he was out again. He was out again on Thursday. Jaden Reed didn't practice, but I believe he missed some time last week too before actually playing. So, as far as other injuries, anything else jump to mind right now? Any sense of how things are going to go for their receiving core?
Well, yeah, Christian Watson, you would think he's going to practice before he plays, and so the fact that he hasn't been able to get on the practice field this week would indicate he's not playing in Carolina. For Davian Wicks and Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed's played through a plethora of things this year, and a couple of weeks ago, Matt LeFleur called him a war daddy, which apparently is a good thing. I never heard this before, but apparently that's a good thing, meaning that he's tough as nails. He also said this week that he's as tough of a young guy that he's ever been around. So, he's got some injuries, but he's been playing through that. Davian Wicks, has a bum ankle last week, and all he does is go out and catch 97 yards. I think what's fascinating to me, 2 months ago, when it looked like the Packers might have a top 5 pick, who was the name that you heard the most as far as who that top 5 pick might be used on? It's Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. Let's go get a top receiver. You look at this young skill set around Jordan Love, they don't need to draft a pass catcher high in the draft at this point. I think behind Christian Watson, Jaden Reed and Davian Wicks are their 2 most talented receivers. And when Romeo Doubs is your 4th, that's a hell of a thing to have, because that's not a knock on Romeo Doubs. It's just what Jaden Reed and Davian Wicks have done. When you put Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft together, that's going to open up a lot in this offense. So Brian Gutekunst is designed to have a bunch of young guys, let them grow together, let them go through their growing pains together, right? Get through those scars and accumulate that together, and have them do something after that. It's working out pretty well right now, and there's a lot of optimism, I think, at the pass catching part of this offense going forward.
I think there's a question whether they draft a wide receiver at all with the amount of options that have developed, in 2024 anyway.
Funny, I remember. Oh, go ahead.
No, he's pointing out Malik.
I was just going to say that the thing I remember the most during their downslide, early on, was that people wanted that pick to take Caleb Williams. They were talking quarterbacks at that time, and I would think most people have changed their opinion on that by now. I would think, but not everybody has. I think we've seen probably enough of Jordan Love to know that he's at least a very functional starting quarterback in the NFL.
Spoon, that's what's so fascinating to me. When you look at Matt LeFleur, he should be being celebrated right now, right? He's being vilified, understandably so, because of the Joe Barry situation. But what was Matt LeFleur's job this season? Bring the NFL's youngest offensive line. And 2 months ago, they were broken. They were one of the worst in the league. And they have grown overnight into much better than that. But what was his job when he was hired? Right? 1, resurrect Aaron Rodgers back into MVP form. Check. He did that. But 1B was make sure there's a quarterback after Aaron Rodgers. And he had this 3-year project to develop Jordan Love. And we saw him in Kansas City 2021. And we've seen him this season. There's no question that he developed Jordan Love. Like he's their franchise quarterback they're going to build around. All these primary boxes that Matt LeFleur had to check, he's checked them, both short-term and long-term. And yet, because of his loyalty to Joe Barry, fans, you can understand why. That he's been vilified in the fan base because, my goodness, how many times do you need your defensive coordinator to not line up the defense right in a big game before you make a change? So I find that fascinating that Matt LeFleur should be being celebrated right now, and instead it's very different.
Yeah, that's the difference between being an offensive coordinator and a head coach. A head coach is in charge of everything, and that's part of the resume, is you have to take care of everything. And so, yeah, you're right. He's done a nice job with the offense, and despite having, not the best offensive line, not having the left tackle that he thought he was going to have, and managing to, resurrect the offense, especially with the young group of receivers they have and tight ends. But, defense is part of the resume. It's just like, for us, it's like spelling is part of the resume, and grammar.
Even though we're all terrible at it.
We may be able to report, but we got to be able to write and spell. Well, you don't have to spell anymore because
Microsoft Word or everything.
Yeah, whatever. But you get the point.
When they invented the red underline in Microsoft Word or whatever programs use that now, that was beautiful. That was a game changer.
It's a nice thing, yes.
I'm looking at these stats right now, trying to figure out who's going to lead this team in receiving this year, and there are legitimately 4 candidates if Christian Watson can get healthy. I wonder if Davian Wicks sneaks past everybody. He's about 100 yards behind Jaden Reed right now, so it would require, I think, Jaden Reed to miss a game with these injuries. Not that anyone's pulling for that, but Davian Wicks is so good. He gets so open, and I really think he might actually be their best receiver when it's all said and done. I mean, there's a lot of guys to choose from, so I guess it'll probably be Reed, but man, they really
You
have
probably
set themselves
don't
up.
know this, but I've hooked my wagon to Davian
He's your
Wicks,
guy. He's your Jack
in-
Heflin.
in training camp because you could just see something with him, and it's amazing how people see, what an inexact science. And I'm not saying Davian Wicks is going to be the greatest receiver ever. We thought Romeo Doubs would have a killer second. See, I did anyway, and he's
right.
not. So we'll hold the horses on that. But boy, you're right. He is a fun guy to watch, and there's a ton of potential there for a 5th-round pick.
For sure. He had a great junior season at Virginia, and then they had a coaching change. Things kind of fell apart senior year, and I think that's probably why he fell a little bit. He was a productive player in college, and it just showing up.
I think that staff badmouthed him a little bit. The last staff, because they didn't feel like he fit into what they did. So I think that hurt him.
Yeah, well, Packers gain at this point. I suppose we should talk about Carolina a little bit, I guess, 35 minutes in. Well, that's the thing.
Not really.
Like, they're so bad. They're 2-12, but at this point, the Packers could realistically win or lose to just about anybody. They did win their last game. They beat the Atlanta Falcons. They did not score a touchdown, but they found a way to win. It's their only 2 wins this year against the Falcons and the Texans. Bryce Young has led them on a 90-plus yard drive at the end of the game to set up a game-winning field goal. It has been a very bad year for the first overall pick, Bryce Young. He does not, as is customary for a top quarterback who gets thrown in the fire right away on a bad team. That's not unusual. But, he's got maybe some potential. I don't know. I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing like maybe he wasn't quite the player they thought he was going to be, but it's obviously so early. So I'm curious, I guess, what the threat level is for the Carolina Panthers. They have kind of an interesting defense that gives up a lot of points, but not a lot of yards. I mentioned Evero, the defensive coordinator, is kind of a rising star still. So Ryan, I'll start. I mean, again, this team could lose to anybody, but theoretically, this should be a W on paper. So what has to go wrong for the Packers to lose this game?
I'll make this real quick because practice just ended, so we got to wrap.
Oh no!
But basically, if you take what they did against the Giants and repeat it, they might lose because that's a game that the Packers should have absolutely won. They're a better team than the Giants. They're more talented on paper than the Giants. They should not have lost to the Giants. So you have to play clean. Don't turn the ball over if you're Jordan Love. That was the big issue with him. Don't fumble a punt or muff a punt and then fall on it, recover it, and get back up. Don't do the common sense things like that. But I think that, for me, this is another litmus test of just the difference between being a rookie, a true rookie starting quarterback in this league, and a guy that is playing your first season as a starter but has had 3 years to develop, and just how much of a difference that makes.
All right, Spoon, what I guess I'll pose the same question to you. What challenges Carolina presents, and where could it go wrong for the Packers?
Well, like every single game the Packers play, they gotta defend the run. You may not have heard of Chubba Hubbard, but he's a pretty good back.
Yeah. And
he's one of those guys who could run for 140 yards on him. So they got to stop the run and put some pressure on Bryce Young. They should have the corners to handle Carolina's receivers. That shouldn't be a problem. But their defense is decent. They got to block Brian Burns. They're not going to be really easy to score on, but they should be easy to stop. And if the defense can't stop them, then the season's over anyway. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Burns was on the injury report this week, but just with an illness, so I guess it would seem likely that he's going to play. Bryce Young's got a little bit of elusiveness. Chuba Hubbard, like you mentioned, 4 yards a carry. I mean, these guys they have some talent, so we'll see if the Packers can bounce back after 2 straight losses. Guys, I got to let you go. If you're going to be going, if practice is over, we'll have to cut it a little bit short, but we'll be back again after the Packers take on the Carolina Panthers. I'm sorry, I'm not going to have time to give you your 30 seconds to tell me about your Christmas plans. I'm really sorry, or your favorite Christmas hymn, or whatever it would. We'll save that for the next one. But thank you for joining me, guys. We will catch up again very soon on the Green 19 podcast. Thank you very much.